Hey, what's going on? What? What's up, folks? I'm back. You're also back. We are back for another update of Ground Zero Salem with your host, Pat. We're listening to Z28 right now. Nobody Rides for Free, a 9-song release. Came out in 2018, featuring Jeff Haywood from Disrupt and Grief. It's great hard rock and stuff, little on the doomy side. Gigantic boulder-sized riffs, which is what the man's known for. The guy who plays drums in this band is my buddy Bro, who runs Residency Records here in Salem. As far as I know, these folks are working on a new one. I just scoured the internet, and by scoured, I checked Bandcamp and Facebook. It looks like they were recording a couple of months ago, so I'm not sure if something's out yet or not. Been looking forward to that coming out. This stuff is just hitting the spot with me lately. As you may have guessed from my recent updates, if you've watched them, lots of heavy stoner, doom, sludge kind of stuff has been hitting the spot with me lately. I'm starting to branch out a little more, kind of exploring other stuff again, but I was heavily into that if you watch the past couple of updates. And what I have for this update is sort of a kitchen sink sort of thing. This is the last of a bunch of purchases I made a few months ago, just a whole stack of stuff, running the gamut from doom to crust and grind and punk and some other stuff. So let's get into it. It's all CDs once again. Probably within the next couple of updates, I'll be looking at other formats, talk about some vinyl, some kitchen jam box tapes and that sort of thing. First up is Swarrrm from Japan. This is crazy, unhinged grindcore stuff from the early 2000s. Came out on F.U.C.T. The title of it is all in kanji, but I do have it pulled up on my phone, the translation. So let's open her up there. So this is called in English, The Imitation Messiahs. The as in like the head coats with the 2 E's. At any rate, this is some wild grindcore shit. At certain moments it brings to mind bands like the Swarrrm and some of that late 90s German metalcore sort of stuff like Acme. It just has a sense of being very epic and very immediate at the same time. It's not a total blast fest. There's a lot of blasting going on, very fast tempos. It's got the big dog, little dog vocal approach with the screeching and growling. But also a lot of like huge monolithic riffs that just kind of stick around for just a moment and are gone. There's a nice sense of almost a melodic approach to some of the riffs and some of the melodies and leads in it. It's very cool, very scattershot and kind of schizophrenic sounding. Very, very, very good. Recommended for grindheads. Next up we got Ogre from Maine. This is one of their earlier releases. I had a later record of theirs not that long ago sent by some friends from Ireland that sent me some stuff a while back. This is an earlier one, maybe their first. I didn't check into that. Dawn of the Proto-Man, one of their first ones. This is also very kind of like doomy, gloomy, hard rock stuff. I wouldn't say it's like straight up traditional doom. There's a big like 70s hard rock influence. Good heavy riffs, pretty melodic, like clear, clean vocals. Great band. They write great tunes. This came out on Minotauro Records. We'll also put out some Tony Tears stuff. Then we've got Naked Raygun, Jettison. Trying to remember where this is in their discography. I think it's their 3rd or 4th album. Naked Raygun, for the uninitiated, are a melodic hardcore band, hardcore punk band from Chicago. They got more like straight up like pop oriented and just more punk than hardcore later on. Their earlier stuff, like their earlier record, Throb, is it's a good punch in the face, like melodic but pretty angry, up-tempo punk record, hardcore record. This, they're working on catchy choruses a little bit more. There's a lot of woeing and hoeing and like that sort of stuff. Maybe if you like the Misfits, you might like this. It's cool. It's a good record. Pretty catchy. Nothing beats Throb for me. That's a early 80s hardcore classic from Chicago. This came out in 1988. Throb Throb, I think, came out in 83 or 84. Then we've got Fear of God, Toxic Voodoo, the second Fear of God record. So, after I talked about Detent, a bunch of people commented, hey, I love Dawn Crosby, I loved her work in Fear of God, and I sort of internally went, oh yeah, that's right, same vocalist. I remember Fear of God, I remember their music videos vaguely from when I was very young. I remember them having a pretty unique sound. Didn't see a lot of women vocalists in metal back then, so that always stuck by me. I remember it being an interesting vocal approach and like pretty dark. And I've picked up Within the Veil, the debut, on cassette. Really cool record. Elements of thrash there, but also very proggy, and like I said, a lot of dark stuff going on. A lot of weird clean parts and like arpeggios and stuff. This, their second record, which came out a few years later, 94. As far as I remember, Within the Veil was 90 or 91. This came out on Pavement, so they were alongside Crowbar and a bunch of others on that label. And this is way heavier. We're talking a guitar tone that is like lurching into something close to Obituary or along those lines. Way heavier. I wouldn't say death metal really at all, but something along the lines of that tone-wise. Not as much like kind of quiet parts. Really pummeling, almost sludgy music on this. And it's really, really good. And it's a crying shame because Dawn passed away just a few years later from alcoholism, from what I read. R.I.P. Then we've got the debut from Sacrilege B.C, Party with God. Came out back in 86. I think it originally came out on Alchemy Records. Got reissued on November Fire Recordings. I talked about their second album, Too Cool to Pray, years and years ago on here. That one's great too. It has less songs on it. The songs are longer, a little bit more like technically accomplished, I guess you could say. This one is short, fast, to the point, thrash metal, almost crossover. There is a punky kind of spirit to it, but it has a very metal execution, especially in the vocal department. Kind of reminds me a bit of like Tom Araya. But yeah, quick breakneck kind of thrash stuff. And then this one. Let's see if I can get through this the first time. Forever, Ungratical, Coronaric, Techniculation, F.U.C.T, Dimensional Depth Perception. Gotta thank Eric Bauer for turning me on to this one. I don't even think I'd heard the name. I'd heard of the skateboard company, streetwear company that Shepard Fairey did way back when, before he got huge, before all the Andre the Giant stuff. I'd heard of that. I'd never heard of the band of the same name. But this is pretty forward-thinking crossover stuff from 1990 from Memphis. Hard to put my finger on what exactly it sounds like, but it falls somewhere in between, I'd say, like Nasty Mix era Accused and Dead Horse, and like maybe even some New York hardcore thrown in there. It's thrashy crossover stuff. The vocals are real weird. They have that sort of like vomity quality that Blaine has from The Accused, but deeper, and he occasionally goes into like sort of a crooning kind of singing, like early Phil Anselmo-ish a little bit. It's very, very cool. It's a cool record. They jump all over the place, and they keep it very interesting. Not a lot of like stuff that you expect to be just coming along down the path, like on a cookie cutter sort of thrash metal release. Yeah, lots of fun surprises on this. They did a reunion record like a couple years ago, but this is from 1990. Came out on Carlisle Records, which I think is a local Memphis imprint. Then we've got the first Primitive Man record, Scorn. I read about these guys in that doom metal book that I talked about last update. And I'd heard of them. I'd listened to some interviews with them on podcasts and such. I knew that they were somewhere in the realm of slower death metal, doomier death metal, and sludge. Turns out they're a lot more than that. They certainly traipse a lot of the territories of stuff I like. Disembowelment and Winter and all those bands. But I'd say they have like some pretty cool, almost like crusty D-beat tempos going on here and there. There's some kind of primal hardcore going on, and just the sound and the recording of this, I have to check out their other stuff because this is their first album, I think, and it sounds massive. I'm kind of ambivalent about modern recordings where everything's almost redlined and huge sounding. But this just sounds like the entire earth is rumbling when you're listening to this thing. Monstrous, heavy growls going on all over the top of everything. Cool record. I want to check out more. Then I've got Fudge Tunnels Creep Diets. Another band, videos all over, imprinted all over my childhood. Just this weird band. I knew one of the members was half of Nail Bomb, the Max Cavalera side project. You know, heard a couple songs here and there on samplers. I had, I think, one of those earache VHSs that I picked up not that long ago. They had a Fudge Tunnel video, but there's a lot of different ingredients I feel like contributing to this. It's very heavy. Manages to come up with something that would appeal to fans of like Seattle grunge and also like noise rock and sludge without being really any of those things. Heavy, riffy, like gauzy, dreamy sounding kind of stuff from the UK. Very fucking cool band. Kind of cursing myself for putting them off for however long it's been, 30 years. Then we've got the debut from Harvey Milk. It's like a released way later. Unreleased very first album by Harvey Milk, recorded by Bob Weston in 1994 and lovingly mastered in 2008 from this very cassette. CD sounds leagues better than the shitty version you've been downloading. Trust us, it sounds awesome. So another band, I saw them at Maryland Death Fest in 2013. They put on a hell of a show. They're one of these bands like Big Business, who also shared members with the Melvins. Big Business and the Melvins, and probably a bunch more that I can't think of, that are riff-oriented and super heavy without being down with all the kind of tropes of doom metal that, you know, go along with big, massive riffs. You know, there's more of an imaginative approach to lyric writing, but the riffs speak for themselves. Fucking incredible. Massive sounding stuff, super heavy, super weird. Cool band. Then we've got this Parasytic. It's the second album from Parasytic. They're a band from the Richmond area. Poison Minds. I know this is kind of an all-star band. I just can't remember what all of the personnel is. I know it's the drummer from Avail and some other people. Might be somebody from Strike Anywhere involved or something like that. One of those bands where maybe it's a passion project where all those guys want to play some really heavy, crusty stuff. Probably, because this sounds nothing like Avail, I'll tell you that much. It's very like thrashy crust. And when I usually talk about crust that's kind of thrashy, you know, I think of Fatum from Russia or some of the Hellbastard stuff or early Sacrilege or, you know, something kind of UK metal punkish. This to me more sounds like almost like Teutonic thrash or Slayer, Rain and Blood era mixed with like a more modern crust sound like His Hero Is Gone or Tragedy. And that's awesome. Razor sharp riffs, real commanding growly vocals, just a great fist in the air. A solid 8 out of 10. Good shit. Came out on Relapse. I have no idea when. Late 2000s probably. Then got a couple of CDs from my buddy Ben, regular commenter. Purchased from him off of Discogs.com. He sent me a copy of the Breakdown 87 demo on CD, which I own on vinyl, but always nice to have as many formats of this classic, this patient zero of metallic New York hardcore. If you don't know Breakdown, Biohazard wouldn't sound like Biohazard probably if it weren't for Breakdown. Madball wouldn't. All those bands that came after that had almost that like syncopated kind of rappy approach to drumming and everything with the crunchy metal guitar were probably inspired by either Breakdown or the band that formed out of Breakdown, which was Killing Time and / Raw Deal, same band. Super important record, fucking raw as balls, but completely on point, super tight, definitely mean sounding. You need this if you consider yourself a fan of New York hardcore. Then, also from Ben, we've got the debut Gasp record. And this is a mouthful. Drome Trialer of Puzzle Zoo People. So I had the Gasp reissue of their demo that the Crypt put out a while ago, and I really liked that. It was an awesome combination of heavy sludgy stuff and like grindy power violence bits here and there. This is a different beast entirely. There's elements of that stuff. There's some stuff that almost reminds me of like the screamier side of grind, a la the Locust that was blowing up like by the end of the 90s. A lot of off-kilter, chaotic kind of drumming. There's a lot of quiet moments and like instrumentals between the songs that sound like tape loops and samples and people whispering. It's bordering on like a psychedelic experience. It's a challenging record, but it's a rewarding one because every single time I listen to it, I get something new out of it. Gasp, yeah, real trippy, hardcore grind, power violence kind of stuff. Kind of hard to categorize, really. And then I forgot to mention this last time, but I also got the Noothgrush release that compiles all their singles. Failing Early, Failing Often. Came out on Slap-A-Ham. Fantastic label, Slap-A-Ham. R.I.P. Chris Dodge's imprint from the 90s into the early 2000s that put out tons and tons of grindy stuff and power violence, but also some sludge, doom stuff as well. Occasional just straight up punk or hardcore record. And this is just a compilation of all this band's early material coming out of the ashes of Asbestos Death, doing all this like straight up ugly, riff-oriented, screechy, feedback-laden, punishing sludge shit. Killer band. Following along, we have Facedowninshit's second album. I talked about the first and the third, I think in the same update. This is Passing Times, which came out on the Crime Think label. Late 90s, early 2000s-ish era. North Carolina band. This is a good bridge of the gap between their earliest material compiled on one CD and then the record they did on Relapse, which is always negative, never positive, something like that. This is sort of in between. It has a lot of like punk elements in it, like the early stuff does. The earliest stuff has plenty of sludge going on with it as well. But this has elements of it that kind of remind me of Black Flag when they started slowing it down, like My War era, and like 80s COC when they start to get weird a little bit, going into like some pretty massive, epic guitar work and riffs that just kind of stretch out into oblivion. It's really cool, really like pained sludge punk record. Put out on, like I said, on Crime Think, which put out a lot of metallic hardcore stuff. It was the label that people from the band Catharsis were involved in. It was also sort of a collective kind of like think tank thing. They did a zine back then called, what was the zine called? I don't remember the name of the zine. Zine was good though. Had interviews with Integrity and stuff like that. It was that whole era. Then we got Strong Intention. What else can we do but fight back? Came out on 6 Weeks Records right around the turn of the century. I got this when it came out. I loved this record and listened to the shit out of it around 2000, 2001. This band was not unlike Proclamation from Boston, who also went from like a more traditional, slightly kind of metallic, crunchy, straight edge hardcore kind of sound into, hey, that band Infest is really good. Let's start playing really fast like them. So it's like kind of clean cut hardcore played with like a lot of blast beats and like blazing speed. Political lyrics, really fucking angry. Yeah, it's almost like put like a 90s Victory Records kind of thing like on 45 and have a dude yelling over it kind of deal. Great stuff. Then I finally got around to picking up the latest COC, No Cross, No Crown. One of these things that came out and I was like, that sounds really good. Not really in the mood for that kind of stuff right now. I'll pass on it for now, and years and years pass by. In that time, sadly, Reed Mullen passed away. But this is a really, really good COC record. I've kept up with Corrosion of Conformity pretty well over the years. I usually check out something new when they have it out. This is one of their strongest records since like Wise Blood, in my humble opinion. The main difference with this is that it seems to have a lot of like cool snaking dual leads that remind me a lot of Thin Lizzy. Like vintage classic Thin Lizzy seems to be a big influence on this. Let me know what you think if you happen to agree. But this came out, I think, also in 2018. It was a while ago now. Yeah, 2018 on Nuclear Blast. R.I.P. Reed Mullen. Hell of a drummer. From what I've been told, a hell of a nice guy, too. Then we've got Annihilation Time 3, third Annihilation Time record. Came out on TP Records in 2008. Annihilation Time were a huge deal for a long time, for a good reason. They played in the punk scene, mostly. They had a really delicious combination of, like, jamming like almost stoner rock stuff. Not the doomy stuff, but more of the Fu Manchu style kind of shit, mixed with like a big influence of like when the 70s hard rock bands kind of kicked it up a notch and played fast. Highway Star, Deep Purple, you know, stuff like that. And the more up-tempo BOC stuff, and like Black Flag, and from the punk side of things, as well as Rich Kids on LSD. They just jammed out like fun as fuck riffs, really cool solos, snotty vocals. You just want to throw on a pair of short shorts and jump on a dangerously small skateboard and just break into somebody's pool. Not that I can do that around here, but maybe wear a headband, you know, try to skate over the light. Then we've got the unreleased Master album from '85. Kind of crazy. It made me think a lot about all the whole arms race to like who started death metal, you know? I mean, everybody gets in the debate over Death versus Possessed, which I think has been talked into the ground. But I often think about Necrophagia. I think about Abominations of Desolation by Morbid Angel, like if that was actually released instead of shelved. And I think about Master, and I think Master and Paul Speckman get the short end of the stick in that conversation a lot. I mean, this is very much a in utero version of the songs that he would do later on, you know, on the Seventh Day God Created Master and the self-titled and all that. But this is awesome, raw, early death metal, you know, or really rough thrash metal. It's a conversation that, you know, you can have with yourself or others or imaginary friends, whatever, viewers on your YouTube channel. But it's awesome. Yeah. Then we've got Schnauzer, Tracks from the Waxed. So this is Jim Konya's project, one of the many. This is a little bit more along the lines of like a crossover, grindcore sort of thing. Lots of other Clevo musicians were involved in this. There's one track I distinctly could hear Tony Erba's vocals. These are all splits and EPs and stuff, conveniently located on one CD. And it's wild. You know, parts of it are kind of chunky and metallic. Some of the stuff is really fast, blistering, heavy kind of thrash guitars. But the vocals kind of sound like an auctioneer on Angel Dust or something. It's just ranting. You know, if you think that like Sean Killian from Violence's vocals are a little off, but you find it oddly appealing, you should definitely listen to this. It just sounds like a dude freaking out. Like not really any kind of rhyme and meter with the music. I'm assuming it's Jim on those. It's very, very, very crazy stuff and a good time. A friend of mine who's from Ohio went and saw them live, and he was expecting some shit to go down because he heard that their shows were crazy, but they just dumped a bunch of stuffed animals into the crowd, and people just like got in fights with stuffed animals apparently. Then this is a blast from the past that I saw on the shelf and just couldn't turn down. Tristania, Beyond the Veil. Like very keyboard laden, operatic, melodic death metal from Europe. I don't remember where. I think Scandinavia somewhere. Take a look at these folks. Where's the promo pic? Yeah. There's a lot of some strong cosplay right there. Yeah, I mean it's a lot going on at once. There's some angelic like operatic vocals, there's growls, there's keyboards, there's, you know, a lot. And I love this at the time when I bought it. Brings back a lot of happy memories. I used to play Final Fantasy VII listening to this all the time on my PS1. And it's perfect for that. It's perfect for doing just that. And listening to it brings me back. If something new came along like this, it definitely wouldn't be in my wheelhouse. But I still remember most of how this goes because I listened to it into the ground back then. And then I've got the Bridge 9 Singles Volume 2. This is compiling a bunch of early Bridge 9 records, 7 inches and splits. Good snapshot of what was going on in hardcore at the time for sure. The Fit for Abuse R&R split, awesome stuff. Fit for Abuse were like an early 80s worship kind of hardcore band when not a lot of bands did that. Taking a lot of influence from Negative Effects, Negative Approach, a lot of Boston stuff. Raw vocals, you know, super fast, like the occasional like mid-paced, like almost kind of oi chorus going on. R&R were sort of similar, but with like a lot of like rock and roll, like AC/DC riffs and stuff. Outbreak were the darlings of Maine when I lived there. Just quick to the point, screaming your head off, like fast hardcore songs. Death Threat and Over My Dead Body. Death Threat being kind of a little bit more on the moshy and metallic hardcore side from Connecticut. Anybody that knows that kind of stuff about hardcore knows Death Threat, knows how important they are. Over My Dead Body were, if I'm remembering right, like a dude from Unbroken, that were like, the whole theme was like, we're older guys, but we're still straight edge. They were decent from what I remember. Breaker Breaker were another main band, another like kind of 80s, late 80s style, like mean, fast hardcore band, and negative hardcore or whatever. They're pretty good. Right Brigade and Poor Excuse being probably my favorite out of all these. I have the original vinyl behind me. Just nonstop, mean, fast hardcore from New England all the way through on that. Then we've got Sanctuary, Into the Mirror Black. So I remember seeing this record all over the place throughout the years. It's taken me a long time to get into metal of this stripe, and I'm so glad that I have, because it's just the dividends it's paying out is fantastic for my enjoyment as a listener. Long time I couldn't get around vocals like this for the longest time, just because just a high register. It took me a long time to get into King Diamond solo stuff, shit like that. It was quite a while before I could really appreciate like Savatage and a lot of this like early 80s metal stuff outside of Priest and Maiden and all the basic stuff. But if you didn't know, Sanctuary were a band from Seattle. They had elements of thrash. I think they were almost one of these newer power metal, I guess, kind of bands like Halloween that, you know, were clearly listening to Metallica and stuff like that, but they wanted to retain the melody from the older guard. On this, they get a lot more technical than the previous one. I don't have Refuge Denied. I've listened to it plenty. It's great. This has more like somber, like dark parts, you know, quieter moments, clean guitar and stuff like that. There's pretty realistic lyrics on a lot of this. Like Future Tense is all about like the 80s are over. What's going to happen in the 90s, you know, like, and I remember that, a lot of that coming up in conversation way back when, you know, when I was 12. So that's fun. That's a nice walk down memory lane. But yeah, Taste Revenge, all about getting revenge. Does this look like Charles Bukowski to you, by the way? He looks so bummed out. It's like, I haven't gotten any booze today. Then we've got a bonus disc, Black Reflections Revisited, which, if I'm remembering correctly, was released independently before. It was almost kind of hard to get, which is a really well-recorded live record, which I think a lot of the versions on that are better than the studio stuff on here. But yeah, I mean, great songwriting, packed with great songwriting throughout this. Great, you know, thrash-tinged heavy metal, I guess. I love this stuff. Recommend me more stuff like this from the era, if you can. I mean, I'm up on Omen and Halloween, of course. Savatage I've been really enjoying, but any of the more, like, straightforward heavy metal that's, like, competently played from any era, but particularly, you know, 80s and 90s. You got anything to throw at me, let me know. R.I.P. Worldane. Then, Only Living Witness. This is a compilation of their two albums, Prone Mortal Form and Innocence. Both originally came out on Century Media. This was also re-released on Century Media. Only Living Witness were a band from the Boston area that were active in the mid to late 90s, I would say. I think 93 and 95 were when these came out. So yeah, about mid 90s was when this band was active. How can I describe them? I mean, they're very groove oriented. I think people that really like a lot of 90s sounding stuff, like Alice in Chains, Quicksand, shit along those lines, would really appreciate this if you haven't heard them. I think they're a bit of a hidden gem in that regard with stuff that sounds like that. Also Life of Agony, you know, very crooning, soulful kind of vocals. Like I was saying on the last update, like there was a long statute of limitations for me to start appreciating people that sang like that again. Just all those years and years and years of like being subjected to Creed and shit like that on mainstream radio. I just didn't want to hear anybody singing like this. But when I go back to the originators that like did it really well, like Lane Staley, Mia Caputo, people like that, I'm like, okay, yeah, this is coming from a genuine place, so I can appreciate this. And same thing with Only Living Witness. Most of the members, not most of, but at least half of the members of this band came from a thrash metal band called Formicide. Never put out a full length, but did, I believe, 3 demos in the late 80s. And Craig, the guitarist, also went on to be an Agnostic Front and Slapshot now. And you can hear a little bit of, not thrash riffs, but there's just a few choices as far as where the riffs go that are just super heavy hitting, and it's far above like this kind of groovy heavy rock thing that they're sort of playing. Early on, they played a lot with all the East Coast Assault bands, Marauder and Demise and all that stuff. They were on those compilations, and there's a very hardcore spirit to this, but it's also just like a 90s heavy rock kind of sound generally. It's very, very well written. Some of the better music from that time period that doesn't really get talked about nearly enough, in my humble opinion. In its own right, very, very heavy for what it is. Then we've got Born Dead, Our Darkest Fears Now Haunt Us. More of that Oakland gloom going on. Maybe they're not from Oakland, I don't know, they're from the Bay Area, but definitely heavily inspired by early Neurosis, like Pain of Mind era only, more than likely, Amoebics, that kind of stuff, just foggy, scary, but also very fast, kind of thrashing hardcore punk. You can tell it's of the Bush era HC, underrated. More talk about Bush era HC, less about Raygun. We've already put enough hate on Raygun. If you like Christ on Parade, if you like Strung Up, early Neurosis, all that stuff, this is along those lines. Tragedy, you know. Then we've got Armagedom, Silencio Funebre, Brazilian hardcore from 86. Dark, noisy, angry stuff. Like Lobotomia, it's got a little bit of the tightening up on the E, which sounds like it might be leaning a little bit towards something more metallic, but it's very much in the pocket of just raw hardcore from South America. Vocals aren't quite as growly as they got later, but they still have a certain like husky timbre to them, and it's great. Very, very feral, angry HC from Brazil. Then we got Easpa Measa. Might be mispronouncing that. It's Gaelic. This is a band from Dublin, from, I believe the era was early 2000s. I was friends with these folks 2002. I was friends with these folks. I saw them once or twice. They're very good. This is another kitchen sink sort of style records. It has a bunch of elements of punk in it. There's some things that almost sound like they're leaning towards the crustier side of things. I remember Dystopia being a big influence on a lot of hardcore from that area. There's stuff that's sort of more leaning towards like melodic punk. There's a good like trade-off between the vocalists, between Clodagh and Lyncher. Bernos sang as well. There's kind of like more yelling, screeching kind of crust vocals and melodic vocals as well. Yeah, cool punk band. They're a lot of fun. I know Lyncher went on to be the vocalist for this next band, the Dagda, and then now he's in a band called Lankum that are more like inspired by lots of different kinds of folk, but there's a strong influence from a lot of Irish folk, and but very much its own thing, and they're really, really good. And then the Dagda, this is pre-Lyncher. This band was one of the loudest bands I've ever seen. When I was over there, I saw them at the Warzone Festival, which is a festival that used to happen annually in Belfast. The Dagda were incredibly heavy, sonically overwhelming. They sounded a lot like His Hero Is Gone and Union of Uranus and Ordination of Aaron, that kind of stuff. Just massive waves of sound crashing over you. Very disquieting, upset vocals, that sort of thing. Yeah, heavy, throbbing, epic kind of crust hardcore stuff. And I don't know if people ever really talk about them outside of Ireland. I mean, probably in Europe and in the UK, but maybe not so much here. So their CDs are relatively easy to find. So if that sounds like something you'd be into, I'll see if I can scrounge up a link. But check them out, all right? That is it for now. Thank you for bearing with me. I'll talk to you folks soon. Have a good rest of your week. Have a good life. You know, Have a good. Then we've got a bonus dick. Then we've got
hang out listening to Grindcore wearing a dragon mask? Yeah, okay, buddy. Sure.